Hey guys, I've watched this great video specifically about the housing insurance uh, piece and how that plays into the LA fires, what it looks like for recovery times in LA for these affected places for the next year or two. And there's so many insights here that are relevant to midterm rentals. The video is not about midterm rentals. That's what I do. I manage midterm rentals and short-term rentals in Los Angeles, but I want to share with you guys my thoughts in response to this video and how it impacts the midterm rental market in Los Angeles. So, no, I'm not going to have the whole thing recorded here, and I'll share a link to the video so you can watch it in full. It's a great interview by a local real estate agent that I met, but I will clip out the parts that are relevant to MTRs. So let's get started.
Hello, everyone. Rick Albert here with American Real Estate. I have Jimmy Lewis, insurance agent with myiQuotes.com, as well as the incoming 2025 president of the San Fernando Valley Insurance Brokers Association. And we're going to be talking as part of this short series about the fires and what to do next. So thank you, Jimmy, for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rick. This is great that you're working to provide value and resources for our community, which is so heavily impacted right now.
Yeah, and this is somewhat unprecedented, right? It's just like I was talking to someone this morning, and like this is kind of a reminder of like the Northridge earthquake.
It is. It is, and I don't have the exact numbers, but I'm venturing to guess it is much more widespread as far as the
Yeah,
damage than the Northridge earthquake. I don't have the exact numbers,
sure.
but it seems like the number of total losses between the two major fires. I mean, there have been dozens of fires, but the
Yeah.
two major being the Eaton fire up in the Altadena, San Gabriel Valley area, and the Palisades fire, which has affected Santa Monica, Palisades, Topanga, Malibu, Calabasas, and beyond. In excess of 10,000 structures lost, even more damaged. And I think that those are preliminary. I think those numbers are only going to get worse.
Yeah. No, for sure.
So, I've heard this number elsewhere as well, but think about this. 10,000 homes, I believe it's actually 10,000 homes that are lost and not livable anymore. If you think about each of those homes, whether it's a family, an individual, a couple, it is a one housing unit, a group of people who live together. So there's 10,000 of those family units or couples or individuals who now need temporary housing, right? Whether they are staying in LA is a different question. Some of them might go elsewhere. Whether they end up staying with family and friends. But really, if people are staying with family and friends or in hotels right now, it's been about 2 weeks since the fire started. That's a short-term solution, right? Eventually, they're going to need more space, and they're going to look for what's my longer-term plan here for the next year or two before I move back, to before my home is rebuilt. And this is where MTRs really fits. Is a perfect solution, in my opinion, of the need here, people need. Yes, someone could rent a 12-month lease, right? Because most likely it'll take over 12 months for reconstruction and the homes to be move-in ready. I believe it'll take maybe up to 2 years even. But if you know you're only living somewhere for 1 to 2 years, do you want to bother furnishing and buying furniture? If you think if you want the flexibility of not being locked into a 12-year lease, let's say you think maybe in a few years from now you might move somewhere else, or you're not sure what you want to do. If you want to maybe leave LA and come back later, then the midterm rental option, that flexibility is very valuable. And then of course, when it comes to insurance bookings, the budget is not so much of an issue if insurance provides housing and is providing furnished housing for the families. So 10,000 family units that need temporary housing right now. Um, that is, you know, that's really what is going to impact the MTR market here.
And look,
Give you a few different key things that I've been
okay.
sharing with my clients who are going through this firsthand. Um, if you have experienced significant loss, and that could be a total loss, your home is burned down. It could be your home is still standing in a neighborhood where neighbors have all been lost. Those areas, those homes that are still standing probably incurred a significant amount of smoke damage. So if you're in a heavily impacted area, maybe an area that you can't get back into yet, um, it is advisable to open a claim as soon as possible. The fact of the matter is the amount of loss, the amount of insureds that are affected is going to create a strain on the system, more so with some carriers than others, depending on who's writing policies in what areas. So I believe personally it's of utmost importance. Get a claim opened, get in the queue, because this is an extra.
So this is he's talking about the claim process with insurance companies and the backlog that's going to create, right? Everyone's going to be submitting claims, and whatever typical turnaround time for the insurance companies, I think he talks about it next. It'll probably be slower than that, just naturally because of all the claims coming in. So when I think about how long it's going to take from right now to people actually living in those areas again, the homes rebuilt, people moving back in, uh, this backlog is really what makes it it's going to make it take a lot longer. And it's not just on this one step, this claim process, right? You think about every step that has to happen between now and then when people can move back in. There's the cleanup process right now with all the debris. I'm sure there's a kind of a hazardous materials, like step to make sure it's safe, right? I don't know, different chemicals or things that burn down that is hazardous. And then there's the actual if there's planning needed or permitting for reconstruction, the actual getting builders here. Imagine how many builders and need to come in and the backlog there. It's not like every house will be built at the same time, at the same pace. Um, there'll be shortages of labor and maybe not shortages, but I'll say labor and material is a constraint. So that all these things will make all this take longer. If you have any experience or you've talked to anyone who has done major renovations or full construction, just think about how long that typically takes and how there's delays and typically it goes over the expected time for how long it'll take. But this is 10,000 houses being built, not just one, on top of all these other unusual situations that will delay it. So yeah, this is why I think this will be a 1 and 2 year situation of people needing temporary housing in LA while all this is being done.
Extraordinary time, things may take longer than normal. In a typical situation, you call to open a claim, the insurance company is usually in touch within 48 hours. And there are state rules as to how quickly the insurance company has to respond to a claim, but I think there are going to be delays just because there's not going to be enough resources to get to everybody right away. So get in the queue as quick as possible, I think, to get your process and your path to restoration moving as quickly as possible. So number one, open a claim. Number two, if you've been displaced, keep track of all of your expenses. Most policies you have has a separate bucket of coverage called loss of use.
So this piece is really interesting to understand from the insurance side, how home insurance applies to if you're providing the temporary housing, the MTR, how essentially how they're able to pay for MTRs, right? How the insurance company is able to pay for housing for these families. So there's a lot of specifics here that I learned for the first time as far as how the insurance piece works. It's not directly relevant for being MTR a housing provider, but it is always helpful to understand what the other party is working through and kind of maybe the numbers they have to work with, right? People typically, pretty common. I hear people ask, how do we determine how much my house could rent for insurance bookings? There's no formula or like secret way of figuring that out. But some of the things he mentions here essentially dictates how that works.
Or additional living expenses. And so that is a separate bucket of coverage, separate from paying to fix your home. That is there for you. And to simply put it, it will reimburse you for any expenses, reasonable expenses that you incur as a result of being displaced from your home. You're going to be out for months. Could be, if you're rebuilding, could be a year or two,
Hmm.
or even longer. You know, every situation is going to be different. And so a hotel is great initially. Hotel is not good long term. It becomes very
Yep.
costly, and it's hard to restore any type of, life, standard, quality of life and cooking
Normalcy,
and
whatever that might be.
normalcy. Exactly. And so it is common that
Yeah, so he's just speaking here about what I mentioned earlier, that people eventually will need to get out of hotels and move somewhere where they could have a relatively normal routine in life. You know, cooking food, sending the kids to school, going to work, coming home, spending time together as a family. So again, that's where specifically MTRs come in, right? A midterm rental, a furnished rental is going to be the closest thing to providing that, right? It's going to be better than hotel, better than even extended stay kind of hotels, suites. Better than staying at a family and friends place where you feel kind of crowded and you don't have privacy. Yeah, so yeah, that's yeah, I completely agree.
insurance companies will in situations where you're going to be out for a while to work to try to get you in some sort of temporary housing, short-term rentals, month to month type leases. And this is in great demand right now because you have to kind of put it, I like to put things in buckets, and so you have three different buckets of people right now that are being affected. You have people that have lost their homes, and that's what 10,000 plus. Then you have
Hmm.
all the evacuation zones on top of that, tens of thousands more, if not into the hundred thousands category, right? And you have other people that didn't lose their home but are still locked out as well. Maybe that, so there's a big demand for people to find homes right now. And it's crazy. And you're seeing gouging and all the reports. It's awful. But
Yeah.
again, control the things that you can in your immediate.
Yeah, so I want to comment on what he mentioned here. With these different buckets of people, it's going to impact how long they need to stay in a furnished rental, right? Temporary housing. So for people who their houses are a total loss, right, and their communities are so affected, uh, that timeline of when to move back is what I was mentioning, the 1 to 2 years. So we're seeing, which is what we've never seen before, is insurance bookings contacting us and asking for 12-month leases, right? That's we've never seen that before. Typically, when an insurance company contacts us, which is the more run-of-the-mill house damage, leak, maybe a fire, um, it's a 2 to 3 month situation that they say the family needs. Sometimes they'll extend, and like 6 months is kind of the long end. But right off the bat, people are asking for 12-month stays because they know they need at least that long for temporary housing. We also have for properties, especially properties that we manage our short-term rentals, we have people stay for 4 days, right? So those are people who uh, their house was unaffected, but they were in the mandatory evacuation zone. So if you put yourself in those families' shoes, uh, they are not thinking they need a 12-month stay, right? They're thinking they have to find somewhere temporary to live until the evacuation, assuming the fire doesn't reach affected area, until the evacuation orders are lifted, they could go back home, right? So that's most likely going to be a month or less, but also flexible. So people don't want to commit to something too long and then realize I could go back home now and I already paid for something. So there's on the spectrum from a 12-month furnished rental to like a 3 or 4 day, short-term furnished rental. There's demand on the whole spectrum based on who is renting, right? The other thing I want to mention here that he doesn't touch on, he talks about the local families who need housing. I predict and I believe as the reconstruction really picks up, there's going to be an influx of temporary workers who come to LA to do. I think he mentioned it in the video here. I might have skipped on an accident. Um, uh, what do you call it? Field adjusters for insurance companies who have to come look at the homes, right? There might not be enough locally, so insurance companies might fly people out to do that. Those people need housing when they come out. That might be short term, right? So short term rental, they might go to hotels, right? But still temporary housing. Um, Once you get to the remediation, I'll call it the remediation stage. There's workers that have to come in from remediation companies to clean things up. I spoke with a company we worked with before that did water remediation at one of our properties here that's local in LA, and I basically let them know, hey, if you guys have to, if you guys have any plans of bringing in workers, from outside of LA and need housing, let us know. We have a bunch of housing. And she said, yeah, like thank you. We most likely will be doing that, right? So that kind of forward thinking, right, projecting, what will happen in the future. And then after mediation companies, if you keep following the chronological process, rebuilding, right? People are needed, labor to come rebuild. And if there's larger construction companies, I would think it makes sense that they try to scoop up a bunch of projects at once, right? It's not going to be one company doing one house. It's like, let me do all the houses on your street. These companies who can handle that volume, right? A lot of the mom and pop builders won't. I mean, they'll get some work, but they're not going to take, 10, 20 houses at once. But these larger companies will. These larger companies may be national, have a national presence, and they may bring in temporary workers to build the homes. Those people will need MTRs, right? Because building a home takes a while, and they might be there to build one house, and then the next house, and the next house. So there's going to be, while these displaced families still need temporary housing, they're still living in temporary housing, these workers coming into LA will also need temporary housing. So there may be, maybe I would say, maybe second half of this year and next year, 2026, another um, boost to MTR demand in LA. So really interesting, and it is exciting for if you're in MTR space to be able to serve these people in the next couple of years.
Circle. Begin thinking about temporary housing. Maybe talk with a realtor if you know one. I know one here on this call, Rick Albert. He would be a great resource to help secure housing. But be mindful of that because I will say that whatever you think the timeline is going to be to get back into your home, if you're one of the heavily impacted areas, it's going to be longer than you're thinking. So long, short term but longish term housing might be necessary for you. Um, Go look at the coverages. On the beginning of the policy is what's called the policy declaration, and it's usually the first two, three, 4 pages. And on one of those pages, it'll list your coverages. It usually starts with dwelling, known as coverage A. That's coverage to fix your house. Um, Coverage B is called other structures. That's to fix stuff around your house, like fences, pools, detached stuff built on your property. Coverage C is your personal property, all of your stuff, your belongings. There's separate limits allocated to each of these things. And then coverage D is loss of use, sometimes called additional living expense. That's going to be your limit. Now, with that particular coverage, insurance companies handle it differently. And you do need to check the limit. Sometimes the limit is provided in a dollar amount. You have $200,000 of loss of use. Some carriers don't list it. They say reasonable expense up to
Mm.
12 or 24 months being the most two common options. So yeah, you need to look at your policy. And what's important is
I found that bit very useful, just from being the perspective of the housing provider for insurance bookings. So that coverage D, I think it was called, the additional living expense, right? That's really what impacts us as midterm rental owners or operators. Um, Very interesting that, and this is going back to what I said earlier about there's no secret or like magic formula to figure out how much a particular property could rent for as a midterm rental because that number is really dictated by the renter, not the property, right? Typically, in a lot of other situations, it's actually the property itself that dictates. As far as comps, it could be long term, short term, what a property could earn because of the property itself. But in this case, because the budget that the renter, the tenant has is has all these nuances based on their insurance. So Jimmy here mentioned sometimes it's a dollar amount. So you might have had situations where it's not common, but we've had it maybe a couple of times where a insurance booking, the tenant basically used up their dollar amount for their coverage, but they still needed housing. so they had to now rent something and pay out of pocket, right? So we had a current tenant who actually moved to a cheaper property of ours because they couldn't afford to pay for the one that the insurance put them in, but they still needed housing, so they went to a smaller, cheaper property. So that's the dollar amount. But you also mentioned the 12 to 24 months reasonable cost is typical. Um, that's to me kind of amazing coverage because in my experience, it's very rare for an insurance booking to need uh, or family who is affected who needs an insurance rental who to need 12 to 24 months temporary housing. Uh, right now, that's the case, but typically that's very long. So in that situation, I feel like it's a nice amount of time that's covered. But yeah, again, just great insight into what's happening on the other side with the adjusters, with the family, dealing with their insurance, and that really trickles down to impact uh, the rents that we get and the terms that we offer to relocation companies that reach out to us.
You know, the infrastructure needs to be adequate before the rebuilding. And so I'm sure there's conversations being held about that, but there's no doubt that there's going to be decisions that have to be made as far as rebuilding or correcting or improving existing infrastructure, and then there's going to be building codes for the actual homes. Come to my mind, I believe a buzzword that we're all going to be hearing of a lot in the coming years is going to be home hardening. That's something that the insurance industry has been working on for quite some time, and those are proactive steps that you can take both in the design.
So I just want to mention here, this is similar to what I talked about earlier as far as um, projecting out how long it's going to take for people to move back to these communities. Um, there's so many steps I mentioned earlier, but this specific step, building codes, right? I'm not an expert in this area. I've learned just from talking to other real estate investors and developers, but the homes, there might be old homes that were burned down, but now to rebuild the home, you can't just rebuild it the same way because building codes have been updated. And when you build a new building, a new house, you have to follow the current codes. On top of that, for these areas, the codes might actually change this year for those areas. Maybe something that has to do with making homes like he mentions more fire resistant or something like that. So that is also going to add a delay to the building process, both in the permitting kind of planning phase, but maybe I don't know enough about it, but maybe also the building phase. I imagine more in that planning phase. The Rick mentioned earlier, like if someone just built a new house and got burned down, can they just use the same plans and like, all right, get to work, let's rebuild, right? Don't need new plans. Not necessarily, because if there are new codes that basically have been that are new and since those plans were written up a year or two ago, I don't know how long ago, now those plans have to be updated as well. So again, just adding more delay to how long people will need temporary housing who've been displaced.
An architecture of your home to be more fire resistant, but also the surrounding areas beyond the standard LA County brush clearance requirement, landscaping ideas and stuff. So it's hard to see because on one side you have the municipality saying we're going to rebuild and we want to rebuild quickly, but then you also have to stand back and think, well, we have to rebuild smartly too, so that we don't
Right.
repeat this same situation again. So we'll see. I mean, it's too early to tell, but these are the things that have been going through my head.
Yeah, so this, I didn't include everything in this video. It is about an hour long, but a lot of other very insightful information about the housing insurance environment in California. That's not as relevant to MTR, so I didn't include in my video here. But again, go check it out. Great content. Um, yeah, but in this video, I wanted to highlight really how it affects me and my business, which is heavily in the MTR space and the midterm and the short-term rental space, and share that with you guys. Um, Let me know if this is helpful for you. Videos like this, and I would love to make more. Till next time, thanks, guys.